Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant. So, in all likelihood, this will be my last video I make on Rick and Morty for a while. I've covered about half of the season in one video or another, but what I haven't done yet is really sit down and put into words my thoughts on this season as a whole, where it worked and where it didn't. I'm sure you won't agree with all of my opinions on these individual episodes, that's basically guaranteed, but you're more than welcome to comment down below what you thought of the season too. Before I really jumped in though, I did want to take a second to thank each and every one of you for watching. I hit 500,000 subscribers recently, and I couldn't have done that without all of you these past 4 years. So whether you came aboard a long time ago when I only had a few hundred subscribers, found me recently, or are just tuning in for the first time to hear about Rick and Morty, thank you for making this channel what it is. And with that, let's get into it.
Go Team Go Tron!
I already talked about how strong I thought this season premiere was a few months ago, and on rewatch, I definitely stand by that. While I think the season would eventually outdo this first episode, it was a really excellent start, balancing a funny one-off Morty storyline with a Rick plot that gave us the character of Mr. Nimbus. It was a good way to kick off a season that was much more interested in Rick's past than the show has ever really been, so Nimbus was a good window into what would become a pretty major recurring theme. In my video on it though, I talked a lot about Jessica, a character who seemed to be permanently changed by the events of this episode, and I wondered if those changes would stick and how much of a difference it would end up making. Well, with the hindsight of the rest of the season, the answer appears to be not much. Jessica hasn't even appeared since this episode. I'm interested to see if she plays a role at all in season 6, or if this one was basically her being written out of the show for good. Episode 2 of this season, which saw a massive war of Ricks against other Ricks, was not a favorite of mine. I found it really repetitive and predictable, but with some saving graces like an amazing post-credits scene. My video on that episode, I think by a fairly wide margin, actually has the worst like to dislike ratio of any video I've ever posted on here. So while there was some people who agreed with me, it became clear pretty quickly that this was like a beloved episode for a lot of people out there. On rewatch, my opinion didn't really change. It's far from terrible, and there is some great gags sprinkled throughout, but it never really coheres for me. A lot of you disagree, and that's fine. I'm glad a lot of you loved it. But for me, it was just sort of the bottom end of average. Not bad, and a fair bit better than the worst that this season had to offer, but not really the show at its best. Then we arrive at the third episode of season 5, A Rick Convenient Mort. There was a lot to like here, I thought. Alison Brie gave a solid performance as Planetina, injecting a goofy Captain Planet homage with an actual sense of anger and sadness. The idea of the Captain Planet kids getting older and becoming jaded and horrible brand managers was a pretty funny one. And I thought it gave us one of the better Morty storylines this year, including some really good moments with Beth. The B-plot, which saw Summer and Rick going to parties on planets that were about to be destroyed, was solid enough, but nothing spectacular. Overall, this was kind of a middle-of-the-road episode, and I didn't feel super strongly about it either way. The fourth episode, Rick Pendant Spray, was... Look, I'm not going to harp on this episode for too long, because 1,000 channels have already taken this thing to task and called it the worst episode the show's ever done. It didn't, enrage me or anything, but yeah, it just felt really off. Like an episode of Rick and Morty beamed in from a parallel universe where the creators of the show were no longer involved at all. In short, it just didn't really feel like an episode of Rick and Morty to me. I have no issue with gross out humor, that's always been a big element of the show. But here, it kind of felt like the idea of Morty's sperm becoming giant and attacking the world was about where the joke started and ended. I'm sure the concept sounded hilarious in the writer's room, but the final script never really built that concept into anything nearly as good as your average Rick and Morty episode. To be honest, it had me really worried that the show was on much shakier ground than I expected. Thankfully though, the next episode was one of my absolute favorites of the season. One which saw Rick taking Jerry to a karaoke bar to humiliate himself for the pleasure of some Hellraiser-esque pain-pleasure demons, and the other which had Summer and Morty trying to impress a new kid in school, leading them on an adventure with Rick's living spaceship, were great. This wasn't one of the weightier, backstory-filled episodes of the show. I've made a lot of videos praising episodes like that, but that's obviously just one tool in the show's pretty versatile toolbox. What it did well was tell two straightforward and really funny stories, one of which actually did some solid character exploration. Jerry has always been the show's punching bag, and that's kind of the role he serves here too. But Beth and Rick are also forced to confront the fact that their desperate need to be cooler than Jerry is also something the Pain Demons find hilariously lame. There is no, oh actually Jerry is the cool one twist or anything like that. Jerry remains very Jerry. But this episode did have a more nuanced take on his relationship with both his wife and his father-in-law than we're really used to getting. And the spaceship storyline, which saw Rick's car go on a date with a transformer, was just really funny. Like, I wish I had something more interesting to say about this segment, but that's really it. The jokes were landing, and the show was firing on all cylinders. Definitely an episode that I did enjoy revisiting. The show manages to follow it up with an episode that I think is pretty solid too. Rick and Morty's Thanksploitation Spectacular. I think my favorite thing about this one was how it gave veteran character actor Keith David an episode in the spotlight. He's always been funny as the president, but he finally gets this entire episode to really sink his teeth into, and it doesn't disappoint. The premise, which reveals that Rick has been transforming himself into a turkey to get presidential pardons, is exactly the kind of goofy central conceit that the show can expand and build on amazingly at its best. It didn't pull that off in the Sperm episode, but I think it does here. There's been a lot of Thanksgiving episodes of comedy TV through the years, usually in sitcoms like New Girl or Cheers. This was basically nothing like any of them. Like, not many shows has the president transforming himself into a turkey, but I think this one really earns its place at that table as one of the best Thanksgiving themed episodes out there. The 7th episode though, which I'll just call the Gotron episode because the actual title is a real mouthful, is probably second to last for me. Unlike the Sperm episode, which this one really calls back to, the problem here isn't that they only had one idea that they failed to do anything that funny with, it's actually kind of the opposite. This one is a giant stew of ideas, from Voltron references to anime characters, to a large portion of the plot hinging on a Goodfellas riff. The anime jokes especially don't feel specific or clever enough to really go anywhere. And when you add to that the fact that a Dan Harmon show has already done a far better Goodfellas themed episode on his old show, Community, which actually hits a lot of the same beats, the main characters getting in on the ground floor of something and then becoming spoiled and vindictive assholes as power corrupts them, this episode doesn't look very flattering in comparison.
That new t-shirt smell. I bet we could sell these.
Hells yeah, I f***ing love merch.
Rain, it burns!
Quick, Morty, protect the shirts!
The last 3 episodes I've already talked about extensively, so I won't go over them again too much here, but I did really enjoy them all. Episode 8 especially, I thought turned out to be kind of the biggest towering achievement of this season. It's really funny, it's one of the best stories about the character of Rick that the show has ever done, and it made his relationship with Bird Person far more interesting than I ever could have expected back in season 2. To me, that was the gold standard of Rick and Morty's 5th season. Episode 9 isn't quite as strong, but still very solid, as it more functions as the first part of a 2-part finale, and episode 10 took us out on a high note with a surprisingly intense return to the Citadel. When taken as a whole, Rick and Morty Season 5 is a really interesting year of TV to think about. Flat out, I do not like it as much as the first 2. Those early episodes of the show still had so much ground yet to cover with these characters that it almost always felt incredibly surprising and fresh. But I will say I don't think this season falters too much when compared to the last 2. Some will disagree, I'm sure, but the more time I've had to think about it, the more I settled on this being maybe slightly better than Season 4. Its lows were lower, but I think its highs were also a bit higher. Rick and Morty mostly kept up with its high standards of quality here. That may sound like I'm damning it with faint praise, but for an aging show, that's really no small task. Still, I hope that next season finds ways to shake up these character dynamics a bit, and that the writers try to make sure a script as mediocre as Rick Pendant Spray doesn't make it out the door. In the end, I think the show made up for those faults, and I'm extremely interested to see what they have in mind for next year. Finally, I really want to thank today's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant has been a sponsor on more than a few Rick and Morty videos, and I'm really happy to have them back this week. Brilliant takes what could have been really boring STEM-focused lectures and turns them into fun, interactive challenges for you to solve. Lately I've been trying out computer science, starting with the basics of algorithm fundamentals. But maybe you're more in the mood for engineering, with its topics like trigonometry and solar energy. Whatever gets you interested, Brilliant does a great job of making it all so interactive. So you're always trying things out for yourself, not just memorizing boring formulas. That makes these challenges feel manageable and a lot of fun. Not to mention, this is a website and app designed around respecting your time, helping you make progress every time you use it and coming out the other end much more knowledgeable. So to build on your knowledge, go to brilliant.org/midnight and try it for free. And the first 200 people to go to that link will also get 20% off the annual premium subscription.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes, too.